Right.
Welcome, everyone. If you've tuned in for Getting Grip on Mind with Venerable Robina Courtin, congratulations, you're in the right place. And to introduce our speaker, we have our trustee from the Foundation for Developing Compassion Wisdom, Martin Strong. So I'm going to hand over to Martin now.
Yeah, so welcome everyone to the Compassion and Wisdom in Action Conference. This session has been organized by FDCW to celebrate and share universal education programs so we can all develop our compassion and our wisdom. So I've gotten the great honor to introduce Venerable Robina. It's been my teacher for quite a few years. So I've heard Venerable Robina tell this story about how she was a little girl. She was telling everyone that she would be a priest. She was born in a Catholic family. When people told her that she couldn't be a priest because she was a girl, she said that then she would definitely be a nun. And now she has been a nun for over 40 years, working tirelessly for her teachers, Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And a little over 10 years ago, I was coordinating a tiny Buddhist meditation and study group in Stockholm. And Venerable Robina was doing a teaching tour in Europe. So we invited her, and amazingly, she agreed to come, even though we were such a small group tucked away up in Stockholm, Sweden. And thanks in large part to Venerable coming back to Stockholm over the years, the study group grew and grew until eventually it became a meditation center called Yeshe Norbu. And this January, she is yet again coming back to teach. So Venerable has really, over years, giving me the courage to do things that I really didn't think was possible. She has taught me so much, given me so many insights into how I can grow and evolve. She has also given me many compassionate kicks in the butt over the years. And she has very compassionately shown me my faults, which I think when done skillfully is the most precious gift anyone can really receive. And I mentioned I come from Stockholm in Sweden, but in fact, I just moved with my family to Melbourne in Australia, which also happens to be where Venerable Robina was born. So I definitely feel there's a connection there. Well, anyways, enough of my blah, blah, blah.
Thank you, Martin.
So I just want to, before we start, there's some housekeeping, I guess. We will, Venerable will speak for about 45 minutes, and then there will be a question and answer session. You can also write questions in the chat during the presentation, and they might be picked up by Venerable, and I will also help moderate any questions. And with that, I will hand over to you, Venerable.
Thank you, Martin, so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, Victoria. Thank you, everybody at this wonderful group, and thank you, everybody who's here right now. So happy to see you all. I hope you can hear me. Or I hope yes. So, okay, and these wonderful human beings here.
Happy to see you.
We've got a whole bunch of people here translating, so this is marvelous. So, you know, Lama Yeshe, we know Lama Yeshe is the inspiration to this. And I mean, I met Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe in Australia when I was about 30 or something, 31 or something. And I mean, of course, because Buddhism had been sitting up there beautifully in the mountains, untouched, you know, for 1200 years, something like this. And so when Lama Zopa Rinpoche spoke, he spoke as if he, you know, from the medieval days, nothing much had changed. The structure, the language, the packaging. And of course, I just didn't understand it. I was struggling. I heard the words, but I didn't understand the framework. I was really lost. I mean, I knew I'd found my path. I sat there, but then Lama Yeshe would come in the evenings, and I tell you, I would sigh with relief. I could not believe it. Lama suddenly, it kind of sounded possible. Whatever he said, it made you realize it's possible. So the thing was that with the essence of Buddhism, the absolute essence. You could say that Buddha's expertise is really the mind. I mean, you know, I always quote His Holiness, who says it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self. Well, we arrogant white people from Europe and Australia, you know, probably thought it was Mr. Freud 100 years ago. So, I mean, it's shocking to hear this. And then when you heard Lama Yeshe, it was like a modern understanding of the mind. And this is what is so marvelous about the Buddha. I mean, he came from this amazing system, you know, where he learned about the mind. He didn't invent all this stuff. The Indians already before him had done unbelievable work in investigating the mind. Now, not the brain. That's not Buddha's expertise. He doesn't have a problem with the brain. His expertise and the expertise of these Indians before him was the actual subjective cognitive process itself, the thousands and thoughts and feelings and emotions, which for most of us just feel like total chaos, you know. But this is Buddha's expertise. And Lama Yeshe had this incredible ability to cut through, to present this view, but at the same time to present it in a very optimistic way. I mean, he could see naturally his first students that first came to Kopan Monastery in the 70s. It happened to be the hippies, and they were going for drugs and enlightenment. God knows why we mix those two together. So Lama could see with his clarity, because this is what Buddhism brings, incredible clarity. He could see the minds of these hippies and the enormous kind of the neurotic self-pity that we have in the West, you know, and this feeling of hopelessness and this feeling that we're set in stone and this overwhelming sense of guilt and low self-esteem. So Lama never stopped lifting us, you know, giving us this marvelous this insight, realize we have the ability to see our mind and to transform it. And so as Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, we can mold our mind into any shape we like. I mean, this is like a revelation to us, because we really, you know, because we are naturally born in the modern world, and the prevailing view is indeed neuroscience, and there's no need to criticize it. It's a particular way of seeing the world, you know. And so it's like, I remember last century, the 20th century, one scientist, Canadian fellow, I think, he said the greatest finding of the 20th century is this neuroplasticity. And this is because of these marvelous conversations between His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all the best brains in the materialist world really beginning to come together, and on the basis of listening to these amazing Indian Buddhist ideas, starting to realize from having done tests on brains, that we're not stuck with the brain we're born with. The way the Buddha would say it is, we're not stuck with the mind we're born with, that the mind is a totally flexible thing, and then we can transform it, or as Lama Zopa says, mold it into any shape we like. Well, what's the shape we want to mold it into? Well, this is where it's so fascinating. You know, the Buddhism really is a presentation of ethics, incredible, stable ethics. Buddhism is also a presentation of the mind. There's no doubt about that. But Buddhism also is this marvelous philosophical presentation of the nature of the universe. But all of these in Buddhism come together, you know, and the Buddha's fundamental view is, and this view, by the way, where does it come from? Not from on high. Buddha's not a creator. He doesn't posit a creator. We don't need creating. We create ourselves, he says. You know, it came from his own direct experience, that our happiness and our suffering, the main source of it is not on the outside world. The main source of it is within us. And that by beginning our practice, the very first level of practice in Buddhism is learn to become an ethical, stable, ethical person. And then on the basis of this, we become intimately familiar with the workings of our thoughts and feelings and emotions based on using these marvelous skills called concentration meditation, invented by these Indians well before the Buddha. A combination of good ethics and then learning to unpack and unravel one's mind, we can turn ourselves into a very wise and happy and compassionate person. I mean, the simplest words, that's the bottom line of what you're trying to do as a Buddhist, you know. There's this marvelous analogy that a bird needs two wings, and that's really a way of framing the entire path. So the end result in Buddhism is kind of rather grand, and it seems almost a bit like science fiction, and it's actually indicated by this word Buddha. The etymology of the word is very delicious, and the Tibetan equivalent, the word Sangye. The first syllable implies the utter eradication from one's mind, from one's own thoughts and feelings and emotions, the utter eradication of all neuroses, all fear, all neurotic sense of a separate self, all attachment, anger, depression, jealousy, the stuff that we are intimately familiar with and that we assume, and indeed even in our modern views, we assume are at the core of our being. This is Buddha's radical finding, and it's almost quite shocking to hear it. But that's the first one, and that's the development of the wisdom wing. Then you learn on the basis of good ethics and then become familiar with your mind and then unpack and unravel the contents. And slowly, Buddha basically is a cognitive therapist. Honestly, by changing your thoughts, you then, which inform your emotions, you then eventually, long term, are able to completely eradicate them. And why we are able to, and all this is indicated by this first syllable, Bud, why we are able to eradicate these thoughts from our mind, which sounds so weird to us because it seems like you're cutting off a piece of your, a part of your body, but because these thoughts, which inform our neurotic emotions, have no fundamental basis in reality. And that's another whole discussion. No time for that here. We need to discover that. And these are the states of mind that causes so much pain and suffering, because we're living in la-la land as a result of this attachment, anger, jealousy, and low self-esteem. And so Buddha's analysis is very clear in presenting how they are invalid, how they have no basis in reality, and how they cause us so much pain, and how, of course, they are the basis of why we harm others. I mean, look at the world. You don't kill and lie and steal and rape because you love people. It's because of fear and anger and attachment and neurosis. Look at the world, But not only can we rid the mind of the rubbish, which is what Buddha means by liberation from suffering and its causes, we can also develop the second wing of the bird, and this is the compassion wing. This is the one of helping others. This is the Bodhisattva model, We can develop to perfection all the goodness. Wisdom, clarity, kindness, compassion, generosity, forgiveness. For Buddha, these are at the core of our being. These are what define us. These are the source of our happiness and the source of our ability to make others happy. So this is the job to be done. If this is the end result, Buddha, rid of all the rubbish, full of all the goodness, then that obviously implies the job. And so from day one, first you control the servants of your mind, the body and speech. They're the ones that do the harm. Then you can control the mind and begin to change it and really begin to develop our own marvelous potential. So never forget that our own happiness comes from this. It's not just some kind of noble job of only helping others. The wisdom ring is what develops our happiness. And this is the point. Along with love and compassion and wisdom is the bonus called happiness, called joy. This is a shock to us. When Lama talked, he always made this, he strongly emphasized, that happiness, joy, come along with this job. This is like the bonus, The person who's loving and kind and wise is courageous, self-confident, and joyful. I mean, can you imagine? This is what we want. I mean, Buddha's idea of what happiness is really uncomplicated, It's what you get when you learn to harness your crazy energy and develop your goodness. The bonus is that you become happy. And then, because you've got wisdom as well, you can be of benefit to the world, I mean, this is really the essence of this mind of ours. This is a Buddhist potential. So I think it's an unusual concept. I don't think we talk. We do talk in neuroscience about how much potential the brain has, but mainly in terms of capability, not in terms of happiness. I don't think we're really that confident in the modern views about how to get happy. There are 47 varieties of it and 47 views of how to get it and even what it is. But for the Buddha, it's really clear. The extent to which we're caught up in anger, attachment, depression, jealousy is the extent to which we are not happy. The extent to which we lessen those and grow the goodness is the extent to which we become happy. It's very logical in Buddhism. And this is a revelation, And this is what Lama, from the very beginning, he would say, the mind is so powerful. You can do so much with it. And this is also something interesting when you study the mind in more depth in Buddhism. You do learn that, for example, not a single thing we think or do or say or see or perceive goes astray. Everything is stored in our mind. And we're not necessarily here talking about the brain, because Buddha doesn't say the mind is the brain. And of course, as we know, if we've heard about Buddhism, he says we bring our mind with us from past lives. And so there's so much power, there's so much packed in our mind, but we don't access 99% of it. But as we progress, as we lessen the rubbish, as we loosen the grip of ego grasping, we access more and more and more of our own mind, more of our power, and therefore more of our ability to be happy and to be of benefit to others. This is the heart of being a Buddhist, you know. It's about learning to stop suffering and get happy, and then to how to help others do the same. And surely this is what we want, you know. So the key thing here then, if this is the case, then what we need to do, the key thing to do, the actual kind of application of this job of learning to be less suffering and learning to be happy, is we need to understand then the Buddha's presentation of the contents of the mind. And in one way, it's kind of deceptively simple. We all know from the second we wake up in the morning until the second we go to sleep at night, our mind is overwhelming. I mean, mostly we're busy doing the dishes, driving the car, dealing with the children, and the thoughts we know are in the background and we don't pay attention. So it's only when the thoughts come to the surface and become emotional that we then start to notice. And then it's when it's really painful, you know? So the thing is, we need to learn then to identify. If we can rid the mind of all the rubbish and then grow all the goodness, it's obvious that we need to distinguish between the rubbish and the goodness, speaking very simply. But this is the key job of being a Buddhist, being our own therapist, as Lama Yeshe would put it, you know, to learn to know how to navigate what goes on in our mind. But one of our major problems, one of the obstacles in doing this, like I said before, is because we're so preoccupied with the outside world. I mean, this is where our life is. Life for us, by definition, is the outside world. The house, the kitchen, the car, the people, the traffic. We're totally preoccupied with all of that. And they are the objects of our senses. That's where we live our lives, supposedly. And we don't pay attention to what is going on in here, as I said, until it rises to the surface as very painful emotions. And then it's very hard to deal with. So one of the key jobs, first of all, then, is to know how to label what goes on in our mind. And the Buddha's view is deceptively simple. He talks about how we've got these neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based, limited states of mind that are the source of our pain. And like I said, we know the names: anger, fear, depression, jealousy, low self-esteem, you name it. And then we have the other stuff, you know, love, kindness, generosity. But the ones that seem to be busy mostly, isn't it, is the neurotic ones. They seem to come uninvited, and they seem to run the show. And they're the ones we notice most. I've never met a person yet who says, Robina, I can't stop thinking good thoughts. I mean, it's kind of ironic, isn't it? So the trouble is also, because the unhappy ones seem to run the show, we don't realize that we can learn to control them, and we don't realize that we can proactively actually have positive thoughts. We just wait for the positive thoughts to come. And if we don't, then we think, oh, I'm a bad person, I'm hopeless, my thoughts are no good. But I mean, we're so passive about our thoughts. So we need not to be scared of them, although we are, because we think they define me, but we need to learn to identify them. And this is part of the problem, because we do have the positive thoughts, but we mix them together. There's no real, in modern psychology or in neuroscience, there's no way of categorizing the contents of our mind in the same way that Buddha does. It almost seems simplistic, and it seems a bit moralistic to us. Negative states of mind, positive states of mind. I think in modern psychology, we're nervous to talk like that because it sounds like judgment. But Buddha's saying that we need to do this out of compassion for ourselves, because it's the unhappy states of mind that causes so much pain, you know? So we need to first establish there are the negative, neurotic, I-based, very uncomfortable, disturbing emotions, and then there are the positive ones. But the trouble is, because we take them all for granted, we mix them together. So look at your relationship with your child or with your new boyfriend, you know? You've got, on the one hand, you've got attachment. which for the Buddha is the main source of our pain in daily life. And this is another whole discussion. I mean, this is a profound state of mind for the Buddha, but for us in our culture, we use it almost as an equivalent of love. But it's a very distinct definition in Buddhist psychology. It's emotional hunger, it's dissatisfaction, it's possessiveness, it's manipulation, controlling, neediness. You know, all of these qualities are qualities of this primordial state of mind called attachment. Now we mix it though with love. So I say, I love my boyfriend. So love is in the positive heading, attachment's under the negative heading. And don't hear this as moralistic. Love is altruistic. Love is connected to others. Love is a valid state of mind because it's got a basis. It sees another person, it delights in their happiness and wants to help them, wants them to be happy. That's love. But we assume it is also attachment, and that's our big problem. So the first job is to theoretically see the difference between these two. And they are totally different. Like we say in England and Australia, you know, or in the UK and Australia, they're like chalk and cheese. On the surface, they look similar. Well, especially Australian cheese. When I was born, the English came along to Australia, mostly the English, maybe the Scots as well, I don't know. But the English, all the naughty English people came along. And I mean, the food was beyond disgusting in Australia. You can't imagine. And then it's only when the Italians started coming, we had a real coffee, you know. And I remember cheese was, the only cheese we had was processed cheddar cheese, I think. We never heard of delicious cheeses. It was when the British deigned to allow these strange foreigners to come to Australia, starting in the 1950s, you know. We got proper cheese. So if we look at the horrible, disgusting cheese and chalk, they look similar, I tell you. So the delusion, love and attachment are like chalk and cheese, but they come together. We assume they're the same. And this is the major problem. So the job to distinguish between them, you can't do it first if you don't learn the theory. It's a bit like you've got a garden and it's full of weeds and herbs. Now, if you don't know botany and I don't know botany and all I can see is this overgrown green stuff, I have no way of distinguishing between a herb and a weed. So obviously, if you want to be a gardener, you better learn some botany first. You can't just pull out what you don't like. That's the job here. We have to learn Buddha's botany. We have to learn very clearly the qualities of attachment, and we can recognize them when we hear it. And then the qualities of love, and then we have to slowly distinguish between them. This is the job of being a Buddhist, I tell you. I mean, there's another pair, for example, low self-esteem, which we love to admit to having in our culture, and arrogance. These are two delusions, but this is also another way of looking. So when we think about being arrogant, we'd think, oh, I'm not arrogant. I've got low self-esteem. But in the Buddhist analysis, you know, they're both delusions. They're both neurotic. And one of their key functions, the key functions of all delusions, is they distort, they exaggerate. So arrogance exaggerates your importance. Low self-esteem exaggerates your lack of importance. But we wouldn't have one if we didn't have the other. So this is also a really interesting thing to look at, you know. So what happens is we would confuse low self-esteem with humility. Humility is a virtue. Humility is a really comfortable state of mind of a person who is content in themselves. They would not have low self-esteem. And what's interesting, a person with humility would have self-confidence, but we confuse self-confidence with arrogance. So the key function of all the neuroses, and this is a really good indicator for yourself of if they're present in your mind, is if they're very uncomfortable and they exaggerate. Attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of your boyfriend. Arrogance exaggerates your importance. Low self-esteem exaggerates your lack of importance. And we run between these all the time. So the Buddha's analysis is really clear, and it's a really excellent guideline for looking inside and identifying. And then we can begin to see why we suffer and why we make a mess of our lives, you know, because the unhappy states of mind have two main functions. One is they are extremely disturbing. And we all know that. Check the last time you were anxious. Check the last time you were depressed or jealous. You were really disturbed. It's very clear. But the other function, and this takes us time to see, and this is I've mentioned already, is that they are not accurate assessments. When you see the boyfriend through the lenses of attachment, he looks way more delicious than he actually is. You give him way more power. You're blind. You don't see the real person. It's exactly the same with the chocolate cake. Attachment exaggerates its deliciousness. It exaggerates its role in making you happy. Now, if you see your boyfriend through the lenses of love, and we don't have either of these totally one or the other, they're always mixed, unfortunately, at the moment. Love is seeing him more realistically. Love is related to him. It reaches out beyond yourself and wants this person to be happy, is necessarily more altruistic and is not disturbing. So this is a really tough job, though. This is like learning to know the difference between a weed and a herb, and then doing the job of being your own botanist in your own mind, you know. But you've got to have patience. We've got to have patience and humility with ourselves. And this is where with Lama Yeshe, he would always be encouraging. You always felt, wow, it's possible. Whenever you heard him speak, and that's the courage we need. We need to be enthusiastic. We need to have long-term view, because we are a work in progress. But at the tragedy, the irony of ego is that we identify with the misery. This is me. I am hopeless. I am no good. I cannot do it. This is very instinctive, and this is a function of the neuroses. We've got to not believe that. So it's a tough job. It demands courage. It demands patience. It demands self-respect. And the more you do the job in yourself, then you're capable of helping others as well, because we're all recipes. We're all variations of the same recipe, you know. So my feeling is, I think it's good to have questions now. It's like I'd probably talk for 45 minutes, even though I'm consciously talking slowly. I know it's still fast. So now
you can only talk for about 25 minutes, I think, Venerable.
I know, that's right. So that's more than enough. Come on, I've given you an overview of the whole Buddhist path about the mind. So now, come on, give me some questions, you folks. Any old question, anything at all. I don't care. Not about the football. I don't know much about football. Okay, Victoria has a question.
Can I ask you, Venerable, about climate change? When you look at climate change, you look at the news, you see everything and how fearful everybody is for next generations. How do you have a positive mind to that? How do you transform it?
I hear it. I mean, this is just an example, isn't it, of one of the unhappy things happening in the world. So how do we deal with the suffering in the world is your broader question, really, isn't it, Victoria? And this is the compassion wing. This is a huge one. So the compassion wing is the work of looking outside yourself and realizing, oh my God, look at the suffering, look at the climate change, look at the suffering, look at the racism, look at the sexism, look at the poverty, whatever it might be, take a look at the world. And this is since beginningless time, you're going to see the world is suffering. But the point is this, the compassion wing is more advanced. You know, it's like, use the analogy, you look outside the world and you see everybody is unhealthy. They're all eating wrongly. They don't know that they're obese. They're all sick. But if you haven't done the wisdom wing of learning nutrition, you can have as much compassion as you like for all the unhealthy people. But if you haven't studied nutrition, if you haven't learned to know your body and how the body works, and the wisdom wing, in other words, you have no basis to help a single human being. So compassion, as His Holiness says, compassion is not enough. You need wisdom. And this is the most powerful point. So then what we've got to understand is, first of all, you've got the Buddhist view about karma. There's another whole discussion, again, another whole kettle of fish. No time to talk about that here, but that's one example of a view. Buddha has a very clear view of why things are happening, and that's the part of the wisdom wing. But not even if we don't even worry about karma, the point is this: if we see something outside, like climate change, like poverty, and our compassion opens up and we go, oh my God, look at that suffering, you know, look at the world. And then what happens is, that's compassion. As soon as you reach out beyond yourself and you see suffering, that's empathy, that's compassion. This is marvelous. But why does it drag us down? Why does it freak us out? And this is the key point, not because of compassion, but because you haven't done enough work on your own mind. You've still got masses of attachment. So this is the point. That means we have to understand attachment. It's totally normal. Attachment is this powerful emotional hunger. It's very neurotic. It's very unstable. It's like an infant inside us that can only bear the nice things. Attachment is a junkie that only wants everything nice. So second by second in my own daily life, attachment wants the nice smell, the nice taste, the nice boyfriend, the nice weather. So attachment's a junkie that can only bear the nice things. So of course, climate change, poverty, racism are not nice. So compassion has empathy. The compassion part of you has empathy, but the attachment part pollutes your compassion, and then you have a panic attack because you can't stand it. But so if you work on your mind and you lessen your attachment, and that means you lessen your aversion or anger, because anger is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So throughout the day, you want a cup of tea, someone gives you a cup of tea and you got attachment for it, but then it's not the right flavor, so you get annoyed. That's called anger. Now you look at the climate change and you want the world to be beautiful, you want the world to be wonderful, your compassion reaches out and you see the suffering, but your attachment has a panic attack and it's not what you want, so aversion takes over. So it's attachment and aversion that make us suffer, not compassion. So that's the bodhisattva level. The beings who've really worked on their minds, who've given up attachment and anger to some radical degree, they've got this courage because now they know why the world is the way the world is. They understand the suffering, but it does not drag them down. And that's the courage of the compassion that we are capable of. So compassion on its own is not enough. You need wisdom. And that in Buddhism means the work you do on your own mind to lessen your attachment, to lessen your fears, to lessen your jealousy and depression and anger. That's the hard job. And when you've got less of this, you have more courage and more compassion and more ability to never give up helping the world become a better place. And therefore, because you've given up attachment, there's no fantasy expectations that in 1 minute it'll all be nice. And you don't get depressed and you won't get angry. This is a really powerful point. It takes time to understand it because it's not the way we think in our culture, but this is super powerful. I hope that answers the question, Victoria.
It really does. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
Who
else?
Venerable, maybe we can take a question from the chat here. So we
Please,
have from Alessandra. She asked, in Buddhist ethics, how is self-esteem cultivated when so many failures have been experienced? Thank you, Robina.
That's a good question. Perfect question. How do we get self-confidence when we've done naughty things? I mean, we're human beings. It's like, by definition, that means we have faults. We have attachment. We do bad things. We might lie. We might harm. We might cheat on the boyfriend or whatever level of naughty things we've done. So the thing is, though, the key thing is they don't define us. They are actions. We did do them. They're part of who we are. But our trouble is with ego, the irony of ego is we take those bad actions and then we define the whole of myself with those. In other words, we paint ourselves with that one brush. That's exactly what we do to other people. You might have this boyfriend who's been kind to you for 22 years, and then he cheats on you once. You paint the whole of that boyfriend now based on that one action. That's what the delusions do. They exaggerate. So this is why we have this marvelous psychological little practice we do at the end of every day. We call it purification, where, you acknowledge the things you did wrong today. You regret them. You think, oh, well, I did kick the dog and I did cheat on my boyfriend. You don't get guilt. Guilt says, I did this and I did that and I'm a bad person. No, that's exaggerating. That's just what anger is. He did this and he did that and he is a bad person. It's exaggerating. The Christians have a lovely saying, don't criticize the sinner. Criticize the sin. It's a nice way to put it. It's more precise. So you have the courage, you recognize I did do that, but you know it doesn't define you. You know it's not permanent. So you regret it. And this is a key point, because why? First, because I am sick of this suffering. Regret is like compassion for yourself. I'm sick of this suffering. I don't want to continue this rubbish habit. Then you think of whom can I turn to? So of course, in our Buddhist view, like the analogy of who's your doctor, that's the Buddha for us. It's his methods that we use to heal ourselves. Then we have compassion for those we've harmed. Then we do a little practice, and then we make decisions to change. This is the process, because we're not defined by the negative actions. They are part of who we are, Of course, if they override the good ones, that's why you suffer. Look at the world, look at the crazies, the psychopaths and the terrorists and the murderers. That's the tragedy. They're causing themselves suffering. But still, this is the Buddha's fundamental point, and Lama Yeshe would always stress this, that this negativity is heavy, but doesn't define us, is not set in stone, can eventually be removed, that our true nature is the fundamental goodness. And this is something that's not so logical initially to us, but there's real logic in it. So that's what gives us courage. That's what gives us humility and patience and self-confidence and compassion for ourselves, and therefore compassion for others. It's a very important point. What else is there in there, Martin?
Yeah, we have I guess follow up on that.
Yes, good.
So once this is from Muna, once you've noted these attachments in your mind, how do you stop yourself from feeling guilty, continuing these?
I understand the point.
Spiral out.
Good, thank you. It's a profound question, but the answer is almost so simple, it's embarrassing. Let me use an analogy, okay? Okay, in general, Buddha's saying we can change our minds. So now, when it comes to, let's say, learning music, you begin on the day you start learning music, think of this. What's in your mind? Thoughts, not about music. You don't have any musical thoughts at all. You have no concept of any musical theory. You are totally ignorant, right? But guess what? You start learning musical theory. In the beginning, it's really difficult. You got to, what did he say? B, F, A, B major. You don't know what it means. It's a new language. But so you're asking, how can I learn those new thoughts? Well, guess what? By starting learning them, write them down, do your homework, and suddenly one day you have memorized the musical thoughts, and now you can play the piano. It's hard work, but when it comes to music, cooking, engineering, carpentry, gardening, we know you can begin like knowing nothing and then learning new thoughts. It's exactly the same here, but the tragedy is our emotional thoughts seem to have so much more power. And we, how can I stop feeling guilty? The feeling isn't the point. That's where we've got to go deeper in our mind as we practice and listen and unpack the guilty feeling. What is guilt saying? Well, guilt is self-anger. Guilt is the thought, I did that bad thing and I am a bad person. You've been thinking it so often, it's now automatic, but you can unpack that thought and stop believing in it. It won't happen immediately. It's really, Buddha is a cognitive therapist. You've got to have patience and perseverance to listen more and more to the actual conceptual story that informs what we call emotions. Then you can see how you can change. And it's one step at a time, one day at a time, reconfiguring your conceptual thoughts, reprogramming your mind, learning a new script in your head. It's not a joke. This is exactly what it is, but it takes time. It takes time. What else?
Yeah, we got plenty here.
Good, come on.
Here maybe this one, a bit of left field. How important is it to have a guru?
That's a good point. I mean, I think very easily, take this word, it's a Sanskrit word, and I heard it means something like heavy with qualities. Well, think about this, people. Since you were born, excuse me, there's not a single thing you have learned to do that someone else didn't teach you. Everybody's taught you something. Your mother taught you how to wipe your bottom when you went to the toilet. Your mother taught you how to tie your shoes, your shoelaces. Everything we've learned is learned from someone else. That's the function of a person heavy with qualities. We need to learn cooking. You better find a decent teacher. It's really obvious. It's a no-brainer, actually. It's the quickest way to learn something. Find somebody who knows how to do it. That's it. It's absolutely fundamental. But because we hear this kind of rather ancient Tibetan Buddhist concepts and guru and devotion, we get kind of nervous, But if you unpack it, it's so logical. The quickest way to learn something is to find somebody to find an expert. That's it. In English, we don't have a word like guru or, or lama in Tibetan, but there's the lovely term mentor. A mentor is a really nice word in English, is a person who's got qualities and who wants to help, and who kind of can, I forget the definition, but it's a marvelous definition. So we all need a spiritual mentor, like a piano mentor, a cooking mentor. It's very powerful. And another interesting point, as Lama Yeshe said, the Buddha is dead, okay? So the Four Noble Truths will only become real for you when you hear it from the mouth of a person. And that's true. I always use the example when I first learned to make a cake. I was living in London. I was a hippie. I was 25. And I decided I wanted to make a carrot cake. I remember it. And I was going to go home to Melbourne anyway to see my mum and my family. So I thought, I'll ask my mother. I'm sure she was so happy. She's always known how to make cakes since I was born, but she never pushed it on me. I never had any interest. So the first thought was I wanted to learn to make a cake. And then I'd done my due diligence. I just didn't think I'll ask my mum because I liked my mum. I'd done my due diligence. I'd tasted her cakes. I'd tasted her students' cakes, my sisters. Her peers said she was a good cake maker. So, and this is what's interesting. It was the first time that cakes became real for me because there was a person in front of me. I remember the day, the cake. I remember the time my mother showed me the first time. I said, please, Mum, show me how to make a cake. And then she showed me. I listened and I made the cake. That's the function of a guru. It's the human connection, I'll never forget it. It's stuck in my mind. The day it was an apple and walnut cake. I remember it because that was the first time cakes became real for me. That's the first time the Four Noble Truths will become real for you when you have a human being in front of you that you have decided is the Buddha for you, who's going to show you how to become a Buddha. It's common sense. And as Lama Yeshe says, we all are dying for love. It's a human thing. The heart is a human thing. We've all got these hearts and we want them to open. And that's the meaning of devotion. So if you're going to choose a guru, as Pabonka Rinpoche says, you better choose them very carefully because you're going to end up like them. It's my favorite quote in that 1200-page book. So choose them carefully because you're going to end up like that person. But the human heart is involved. We need it. We've got a human heart, We need to open our little hearts. What else, Martin?
Here's from Mabel. She asks, can you explain what subtle thought is? I think you talked about.
Yeah, I know, it's interesting. Yeah, exactly. You see, because we're so preoccupied with our body, number one, as Lama Yeshe says, we make the body the boss, And because also, this is not being rude about our neuroscience, but we focus on the brain. We focus on the physical, don't we? And then we think we are only the physical. That's all we kind of know we have thoughts and feelings, but we point to the brain when we have those thoughts and feelings. But I mean, the Buddhist view is about the mind, and this is discovered by these Indians before the Buddha, that we have this skill called single-pointed concentration, this shamatha, the world knows, or the vaguely known as mindfulness, these days. It's actually this brilliant skill these Indians created that enables you to completely stop, eventually, the gross conceptual level and the sensory. Now, in the modern world, we don't posit anything more than that. But this is the point. They uncovered this subtler level of our consciousness that's so much more subtle. This is not even heard of in our neuroscience. There are subtler levels of our conscious being. And don't think it's some kind of fantasy. Even a little bit, even if you're fairly quiet, when your emotions are a little bit calm, you can still hear the thoughts all chatting away. They mightn't be very powerful, but they're all there. So as you learn to develop this concentration, you're not focusing on all the rubbish thoughts, but you hear them at an ever more subtle level, ever more subtle level. So even at a slightly more controlled level, you begin to become conscious of the conceptual story that informs the emotion of anger, the emotion of guilt. And what I mean by emotion is when the body feels it. And the tragedy is that's the only time we pay attention. But that for me is a bit like you've got a car and you've never heard of car mechanics, and you drive your brand new car until one day on the freeway at 100 miles an hour, and you suddenly go, oh, my wheels are falling off. That's our trouble in our culture. We don't notice what's going on in our mind until the wheels are falling off, which is when the emotions are roaring to the surface. This is why we have so much suffering. So if we can even begin a little bit to use this Buddhist skill to concentrate, and then to begin throughout the day to pay attention, not just to the dishes and the traffic, but to be noticing every day more and more at the same time what the name of heaven is happening in your thoughts underneath the emotions, because it's when the thoughts are more quiet, you can hear the conceptual story of anger. Anger, you know, we have polite words like annoyed, frustrated, upset, irritated. If we can hear the thoughts, it's saying, why did that happen? How dare there be a red light? Wish my husband would do this, but it's quiet. We don't call it anger yet. It's only when you want to scream that you call it anger. But that didn't come out of nowhere. It was beginning deeper down in these habitual thoughts. That's the real skill we have to learn. And that's not even the subtlest level, but that we can get in touch with. That's why we have to have quiet time with ourselves. You know, that's kind of, yeah, we have to have that 5-minute practice in the morning, a little bit during the day, something in the evening, all kinds of practices. But one of the benefits is you start to hear all the thoughts in your mind, and you shouldn't want them to all go away because we don't like them. We have to become familiar with them because they are the source of the emotions. And this is where the real practice kicks in, you know. But of course, the mind goes to much more subtle levels than that. It sounds a bit esoteric to us, but it's all in the Buddhist literature, you know. What else there, Martin? We have 14 minutes.
Yep. So here's a question from Antonella. How to direct the mind to the good when there is chronic physical pain or suffering?
Really, really difficult, sweetheart. This is another one of the obstacles. You know, there's the mind, which they always refer to as internal, and then anything else from the body outwards, that's external. It seems curious to call physical pain external, but the body is not the mind. This is something, first, it's the revelation. So, you know, whether you're a person in prison, like all my friends in prison, let's say wrongly accused, it's like you think, how can I possibly learn to be happy when I'm in a prison wrongly accused? It's exactly the same question. How can I learn to change my mind when my body is in pain? Well, this is it's possible. Of course, it's incredibly difficult because our mind and our body are intimately connected. There's no question. But but this is interesting too, because I know in modern psychology, many therapists who are working specifically with how to deal with pain, it's about changing the way we interpret it. And this is one way of saying what Buddha is saying, that, for example, when you get a pain, even just you hurt your knee, then immediately we get angry, we annoyed, we get frustrated. How dare this happen? We assume that it's utterly normal that if you get pain, you'll get angry. But no, mind is not the body and body is not the mind. I mean, we can think of this. When, let's say you're at the gym, or I used to study martial arts, and we'd be doing our push-ups on our knuckles, and our teacher, Mr. Lee, would scream, it's only the body. So we all know, like I would be exhausted after my Kung Fu classes. This is when I was living in London. And I'd be exhausted because my body was absolutely aching from head to toe, but my mind was happy. You'd be at the gym and you're sweating and you're pushing and pushing because you know the advantages of it. You know there's pain there, but your mind is happy. So, of course, physical pain that you feel you can't get rid of, and even the drugs don't help, I can't imagine the difficulty, but it's not impossible. So the first key point is to understand that when the anger is there, the suffering is much, much, much worse. This is the really powerful point to see, to make the distinction between your body and your mind. And your mind is the way you interpret the prison, the way you interpret the body, the pain. This is truly a revelation. I mean, this is exactly what people who are working with pain are dealing with by learning. It's the cognitive process, changing the way we interpret it. It's very powerful. I mean, it's not easy. Oh my goodness, it's not easy, but this is the point. It's possible.
Okay, so Here's a question from Dinara. She says, thank you very much, Venerable Robina. What are the causes of depression from a Buddhist perspective? Could it be karma?
Yeah, of course, karma is everything. Karma is what you the Buddha's view is, the materialist view is you start at the time of conception when the egg and sperm come together. And then when we look at the person, we look at their DNA, their genes, and we look at the mummy, the daddy, the grandmother, the grandfather, and we go back to the monkeys, That's the way we track, isn't it? We're looking for the causes of what a person is in the physical only. Well, Buddha looks into the past as well, but of course the radical difference is he says that our mind, which is not the body, has got its own past. You can track your body back to your mother and father, no problem. But you do not track your mind back to them. That's the radical difference. So your mind is this continuity that goes back and back. And so we go into that mother's egg and sperm at the time of conception already programmed with our own tendencies and everything else. So apart from all that, the more we understand this seemingly simple presentation of the Buddhas, they call them the three poisons, this cute little phrase, the three toxic emotions. So the root of these three, the main one, is this primordial sense of a separate, concrete me. They call this ego grasping. Forget that one. On the basis of this, then attachment arises. Attachment is this, as I said before, this, for the Buddha, a major source of our suffering, which is surprising to us because we don't define it like that. It's this emotional hunger, dissatisfaction, therefore emotional neediness, therefore manipulation to get what attachment wants. And therefore, the more the attachment is there, when it doesn't get what it wants, and that's 1,000 times a day, depending on your personality, in general, aversion will arise. Aversion is the bare bone state of mind that is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. Now, if you're a very volatile person, then it will express itself as very strong anger. You will shout and yell. If you're a fairly quiet person, you will say you get annoyed, irritated, frustrated. We all say those words, but we don't think of them as anger, but they're mild anger. And so then when a person is that builds up, because if you don't deal with it second by second, each moment of frustration will build on the next one. And then one day you'll either kill your husband or you'll be unable to get out of bed because you are inert from depression. So it's a buildup of moments of aversion, but at a quieter, more subtle level. That really is what depression is. Depression is, so therefore, it's internalized anger. And it's very subtle because a person who's fairly quiet, who doesn't express their anger every minute, we don't notice it because we don't pay attention. Before you know it, you can't get out of bed because we don't pay attention and we don't deal with it every time it pops up. If we were able to see our minds relatively clearly, moment by moment, and then work with what arises. You drop the cup and you get annoyed. You don't even pay attention to that. And then you forget about it. But the annoyance has gone in. It's a bit of anger. And then another thing happens. And then the husband gets annoyed and the kids don't do what you want. And they build up until you are completely collapsing from primordial depression or constant rage. This almost seems too simple, but it's quite profound. So the key to it is to catch what's in our mind and then to argue with it. Let go of that. Oh, well, it's only a cup, Robina. It's okay, darling. And you kind of forgive yourself. So it won't build up into depression. You'll be, at the end of the day, you won't be exhausted because you're dealing with what's arising in your mind moment by moment to the best of your ability. Then you will stay stable. You won't get out of control. You won't go berserk and you won't get profoundly depressed. I'm not trying to make it simple, but it's profound, because we need to deal with mind moment by moment by moment, because there's always something happening. There's always a commentary in there. There's always attachment and aversion and all the other variations. We've got to deal with them, unpack them, argue with them, lessen them, eventually get rid of them. What else, Martin?
So there's a question. It's fairly long, but the gist of it is that if this person sees that in her work group and family, people are they seem to only have compassion for themselves and maybe a closer circle. And that makes this person a bit sad and annoyed. So they asked, how
Not
can
quite
I?
understanding. I don't quite understand, Martin. Will you say it again, please?
Oh, I guess if you observe others having, very limited compassion, and this is frustrating to you, how can you?
Oh, sorry,
help
you
them
mean
open their
compassion for whom?
So that people they only have compassion maybe for themselves and their closest
You mean they're
circle.
self-centered? That sounds too gentle. You mean they're very self-centered?
Yes, and
Compassion for yourself. No, compassion for yourself is a really valid thing. It's kind, it's self-respectful, but being very self-centered and always miserable and no empathy for others, that's really suffering. Is that what the person's suggesting? So is the question how you help them?
Yeah, to make their compassion more unconditional is what the question says.
I know, I'm hearing you. So you're very kindly calling what they've got for themselves compassion, but I would suggest it's not. I would suggest, you see, if we're overwhelmed by our own needs and our own attachment and our own miseries, that's what's called a very selfish person. I mean, don't be mean about us. We're human beings, but that's why we're miserable. That's why we're miserable. And that's why we're mean to other people. You could have your old mummy who's completely frustrated and unhappy and miserable, thinks you don't love them, always complaining, always moaning. That's not compassion for yourself. That's self-centeredness. That's incredible attachment. And that's why that person suffers. And that's why they are mean to other people. So the answer is, you've got to know the job yourself, how to help yourself. You've got to recognize those qualities in yourself and know that that's why you suffer. Then you can realize, and this is the key one, you see that that's why that person is suffering. That's why they're suffering, and that's why they harm others. So then sometimes you give advice, but advice often is not wanted. So you love them. You have empathy and you love them, but you don't, I mean, if they want to ring you up every day and complain for 5 hours, you don't just let them do that. You say, I'm busy now. You got to be wise, but the starting point has to be your own work on your own mind. That's what gives you the ability to understand their pain and their suffering. And then based on that wisdom, sometimes you just have to love them and accept who they are. You can't force them to change. There's no way we can do that. But if they ask you questions, then you can give advice. But often if it's like our mother or our brother and they're self-centered and they're miserable, we all the time want them to be happy. We keep giving them advice, but they haven't asked us. So it's, we have to mind our own business sometimes and just love them for who they are. If I'm understanding the point correctly, Martin.
Yeah, I think that was spot on. And
okay.
Yeah, we're coming up on the hour here.
Yeah.
You packed an amazing amount of awesome stuff in there. Thank you so much.
Good. So we've got 3 minutes. Another question. One more question. Come on.
One more question. Wow. I think we've
done them.
Pretty much covered all.
Okay. I have one, Martin. Can I ask another? How do you just talked about boundaries, Venerable Robina? So, someone that calls you out for 5 hours wants to talk on Mona.
That's right.
How do you set boundaries? Because I find that hard.
I know, because that's, again, because of our own attachment, Victoria. You see, one way attachment works, the deepest attachment, I mean, to speak about it the last 2 minutes is hilarious. The most primordial attachment, the hardest to see, and then one that everybody has got, it's the subtlest one, the most pervasive, is this attachment to being seen as a nice girl. So if we're a nice girl, Victoria, then we've got compassion, absolutely, but we are terrified. We say, oh, I don't want to upset them. No, we don't want them to dislike us, basically, but we think it's kindness. So you've got to have the courage to not only, you've got to have some empathy for them. They're out of control. They want to talk. They're miserable, but you've also got to have wisdom. And once you're clear about that, you just say, oh, sweetheart, I'm so happy to talk to you, but I have to go now. I'll talk again. Goodbye, darling. You say it kindly. You say it kindly. I mean, if you got your, I mean, we always complain about our mothers, So let's say you got a neurotic mother who's never happy, always miserable. And no matter what you do, you could give her your blood for breakfast. You'll still be miserable. This is another point. you got to want to make your mother happy, but you know you're going to go for 2 hours and you leave yourself at the door and you're there for your mum. You let her complain and moan, but you know in 2 hours you're going to go, I'm going to go now, mum, and she'll know you don't love me. You let her be. You let her be miserable. Your heart breaks for her, but you know you've done everything you can. And the other point here is when it comes to our mother and families, if we're trying to be kind to somebody, we have the attachment in us, has the expectation that they are going to now get happy. Don't have that expectation. And that does not mean that you failed. You did your best. So your darling mother, you can love her as much as you can, but she's got to learn to be happy. So you've got to have the courage. It's got to come from wisdom as well as compassion. And it's tough love. You don't have to say, well, I'm leaving now because you talk too long. Just, I've got to go now, mummy, darling. Bye. That's it. And that comes from wisdom, not having attachment. And if she gets angry with you, let her be angry with you. It's okay. That's it. Good night, everybody. Goodbye. And it's a marvelous conference you're having, and I'm so happy for all of you. And keep moving. And as Lama Yeshe would always put it, never give up. Have confidence in your own ability for joy and contentment and your capacity to help others. That's all I can say. Thank you, Victoria. Thank you, Martin, darling, at 6 o'clock in the morning in Melbourne. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, all you kind
Thank you,
translators.
Venerable Robina.
Thank you
so much, Venerable. You rock.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The translators.
Thanks, Robina.
Thanks, Robina.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
you.
Venerable Robina.
Thank you.